Thank you so much for joining tonight's Intro to 2E, Understanding Bright Students Who Struggle webinar with our speakers, Callie Turk, Abby Kirigin, and Sharmilla Roy. My name is Carrie Williams. I'm the Communications and Information Officer here at Extension. I'm part of the marketing group. Let's look at our agenda so you have a sense of what to expect tonight. I'll begin with intros and housekeeping. We have just a few items. Then Sharmilla will kick things off with an overview of our educational therapy program. And then we'll hand things over to Abby and Callie, who will give us an intro to 2E. We're planning on about 45 minutes for slides tonight, and then we'll be excited to take your questions during that last 15 minutes. Because we have a lot we're excited to cover, we are asking that we save questions until the very end, but you can always go ahead and enter them into the chat, and then I'll be happy to service them up to our speakers, and we'll be sure to knock them off as soon as the slides wrap up. In terms of housekeeping, just a few quick items. We're not too large of a group tonight, so if you're comfortable, we always encourage you to turn your cameras on. It's nice for us to try to connect some names with faces. We are recording tonight's event, you probably saw, so be on the lookout for a follow-up message in the coming days, the link to that recording. And we did talk about questions, but if for whatever reason we can't get to your question tonight, or if you think of something later, you can always go ahead and email us at extension.ucsc.edu, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat in just a second. And someone will follow up with you shortly. So let's bring in our speakers. Callie Turk is co-founder of Real, a nonprofit supporting twice exceptional learners by building bridges between their parents and educators in Silicon Valley. With more than 15 years of experience working in the field, Callie also writes for 2E News and has presented at the 2E at W&M conference, as well as others throughout the country. Also leading us tonight is Abby Kirigin. Abby is the executive director of Real. Her former roles have included a leader for a Bay Area school for dyslexic students, co-founder of a venture-backed startup, an interaction designer for startups, large companies, and the US government. All right, and then kicking us off tonight will be Dr. Sharmilla Roy. Sharmilla brings over 30 years of experience in special education, primarily in teacher training, classroom interventions, and curriculum development. She is a special consultant for the Schwab Lab Learning Center in Palo Alto, and she's worked in private practice as an educational therapist, as well as in the nonprofit sector, and helped families navigate the special education system for their children. And if I didn't mention, she's one of our own. She is an instructor and our program chair of the Educational Therapy Certificate Program. So between Callie, Abby, Sharmilla, we are in excellent hands tonight. Sharmilla, I'm going to stop my share and then hand things over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you. This has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and then Callie and Abby and I met at another setting, and then it was like, this has got to, happen. So I'm very grateful to Callie and Abby for coming here and sharing all of their knowledge and work with us. It's truly enhances our program, and I'm going to share my screen. I have 30 years of experience, but not primarily in teacher education. Actually, I started school worked as a second grade teacher, and then a special educator and an educational therapist. And so my journey has been a long one and an interesting one, and it's been an adventure. So I'm just going to briefly touch on the program itself. And then why are we here? Why are we doing this webinar? Our program is pretty rigorous. It's one of the few offered in the state of California. It's the only extension campus that has an AET approved program. AET is Association of Educational Therapists. It's a 30-unit program, 30 quarter units. And we constantly add and tweak our classes so that it reflects the current field and its requirements. This webinar is one such attempt to include the 2E phenomenon. The other great piece of news is the other campuses might require a master's degree from you, but we do not. We actually have, if you have a bachelor's degree, you can enroll with, and if you have no background, there are, prereqs that you can do and catch up. This will fast track you onto the the AET associate membership. Our classes are, they are WASC approved, they are accredited, they are approved by the main UCSC campus as well as AET. So some of you might want to take a course or two because you're already in the field and you think you just need to expand your toolkit, or others go in for the full 30-unit certificate program and then go on to do their masters if they want to be board certified. If you don't want to be board certified, then there's another path. But increasingly, they are stressing that you should possibly have a master's degree in allied field at least. The class schedules are in the evenings. They are hybrid, online, sometimes in person, not very often. And it sort of caters to whatever works for you. And there's year-round enrollment, so it's good. The program essentially deals with introducing teachers, tutors, learning specialists to educational therapy, and we cover all of the mild to moderate range of learning differences or neurodiversity, particularly reading, writing, ASD, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and executive function. But what we don't have, particularly in our syllabi, is the twice exceptional, which is why I want to make it a topic of importance for the program, so that we are, even though classes do talk about it, I talk about it in my classes, but I would like to offer a meatier slice of the information with that heading. So I would like to say that all of the learning differences we just talked about, our kids post-pandemic and even pre-pandemic are masters at masking, okay? Particularly our 2E students. They do well at school in academics. So people think, a lot of parents think, teachers think that the student's okay because their grades are good. GPA is good. The student, on the other hand, is trying ever so hard to just fit in, be anonymous, does not want to be picked out and put on the spot for being clever, and is trying to avoid the stigma of having difficulties in other areas other than academics. And so educational therapists have long seen this phenomenon in their practices. I have several times, college students, high school students. So really for us, for the field, this is a great time because awareness is growing about learning differences, and believe it or not, TikTok is something that is contributing greatly to teenagers and young adults' awareness of their own neurodiversity, of their own abilities and strengths. So in general, the outlook is really, really good for the profession. Our instructors are all certified by AET. Many of them are board certified. We are practicing professionals in the field and a variety of settings. And on an average, I would say more towards 15 years than 10 experience. So what would you do with a certificate if you got one? If you're a teacher, you might want to make a career change or add educational therapy to your services. If you're already working after school with students, it also helps you establish your own business as a sole proprietor. And really, the wonderful thing is that you can work in any educational setting, one-on-one with a student who has learning differences or is neurodiverse in any way. You can be an advocate for that student, not only in IEPs and 504 meetings, but also help the student to become more self-confident. Honestly, it adds, even if you have been a special ed teacher, the way the courses are structured, the psychosocial aspect of education, the way we look at well-being is something that is truly unique to this profession, and it's been very rewarding for me. Just to give you an idea, these are the figures, recent figures of the number of students who have been identified. I'd like to say, make a note here that these are just the ones that have been identified with learning differences. I mean, if you think about just one learning difference like dyslexia, 80% of students are not diagnosed, but they are in general education classrooms and they have to be, supported well. So many of our 2E students go to college and then find out that, all along, there's a reason why it's taken them so long to get that essay written or read papers or do research or plan their work. And so I see a lot of that coming through how they managed, how they masked, how they camouflaged, and they're successful. So a lot of people don't believe that they have genuine, life-altering struggles. I'd like to just point out that there are 3 required courses coming up. And if you're planning on taking them, this would be a good time to register. Okay, so I begin, where is the connection between twice exceptional and educational therapy and success? So these are all people who recognize, and they've hit the very top of their profession. I am not suggesting that every twice exceptional student is going to become a worldwide phenomenon. What I am suggesting, though, is that their strengths are so significant that they should be given a chance to, and we should support them in every way possible so that they too can reach wherever they think they ought to go and whatever level of success they wish to achieve. So at this point, can we do a quick poll?
We can see here tonight that we have a mix of people. Some are not familiar at all, some are extremely familiar, but most are somewhat familiar, which is a great starting point. And no matter where you're starting from, we're excited to take you to the next level tonight.
So there's a huge link and a connection between educational therapy and twice exceptional, mainly because there is such a push to find student strengths and use those strengths to leverage and get them to be successful at school and perform better in other areas as well, other than academics. And for most of them that I've met, school was something that came easy to them, not the social part, but the academics part. What was difficult was the planning, the homework, deadlines, peers, perfectionism, etc. So these are all areas that EdTherapists work with one-on-one with students who are twice exceptional. And having said that, I'm going to hand this evening over to Callie and Abby, and I'm delighted that you're here.
We will share our screen as soon as we're able. And while we're waiting to do that, I just want to thank Sharmilla, Carrie, and everyone on the UC Santa Cruz team who has helped us find the space and make the space for this presentation. One of the questions that comes up the most in the community work that we do is finding an ed therapist and finding an ed therapist who really understands the twice exceptional profile. So this is just such an honor for us to be here tonight. working together and collaborating to help people understand this profile and why it's important to support them, and maybe get more people engaged in thinking about becoming education therapists or weaving those ed therapy practices into their work as parents or educators wherever they are. So I just wanted to quickly, you got introduced to Abby and to me. Abby may say a few words about herself later. In addition to everything Carrie mentioned, I'm also a mom of 3 kids who are now actually young adults, really. And one of them is twice exceptional. And that's what got me going down this path and wanting to learn more. And what I realized was her needs weren't being met in school, and she wasn't the only one. I've never been someone who thought, oh, my kids are special snowflakes. I've always thought all kids are special snowflakes. And I just wanted to do more work to help educators and parents understand these students, because it's really important that we help them thrive more in school and in life. And so that's what we do at REAL, is we really focus on helping parents and educators help these kids thrive. And I want to just say one quick thing, though, which is to ground what we're doing in a sense that really all human beings have the potential to be great. And this is a sentiment that comes from Dr. Yang Zhao, who is a professor of education at the University of Kansas, and someone whose work we follow really closely, because he says it's not only that we have the potential, but we need to be great in our own way. And we need to do that so that we can be happy and psychologically healthy and have a strong sense of self-worth. And so this really drives all of our work. And today we're really going to focus on the twice exceptional learning profile. That's the work that we do at REAL. And this is just one learning profile among many. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to also acknowledge that this learning profile can intersect with other aspects of a learner's identity and profile, including their socioeconomic status, their ethnicity, their culture, their nationality, their gender, if they have physical disabilities. But why we focus on the twice exceptional as an organization is because we know these children are often really unseen for their potential. They're misdiagnosed, or they are late diagnosed, and then they're really misunderstood, both by other people in their lives and by themselves. So we just want to say that while we focus on the 2E, we're not saying they're more important or a higher priority than any other student, but that they, like all students, have the right to learn, to discover, explore, and develop the unique talents that they bring to the world so that they can develop their own sense of greatness and a sense of belonging. So what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about what is 2E, just to make sure we're all on the same page about the definition we're using tonight. We're going to really dive deep into the complexities of being twice exceptional. And then we're going to try to bring it all to life by walking through a vignette of a middle school twice exceptional child and integrating with that our REAL educator framework as a way to talk about how we can better support these kids. And we'll wrap up with discussion and reflection as a group. So first, what is 2E? So it's important that we establish this definition so that we are on the same page. And the first thing to recognize is that 2E students have distinguishing strengths. They have high ability or potential in one or more areas, such as an academic area. It may not be every academic area. They may not be uniformly strong in all of the areas that they see in school, but they may have an academic strength or a cognitive skill strength, like an amazing memory or attention to detail or a high verbal ability. They may have unexpectedly high creative ability for their age. So these are just some examples of some of the distinguishing strengths that you might see amongst a twice exceptional child. At the same time, they have very complex challenges, such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, ADHD, autism. And those are some of the things that Sharmilla mentioned. And as Sharmilla said, sometimes these are existing, but they haven't been diagnosed or identified yet. And so really where you see this overlap is this where we put the yellow and the blue together, and we really think of our 2E learners as being green. They have both the yellow strengths and those high abilities in one or more areas, while at the same time, they have these complex blue challenges. And they combine and interact to produce a twice exceptional student. And the students are always in the green. They're never like sometimes yellow, sometimes blue. They're always green. That's how they're showing up. It's all part of their identity, and they can't separate these things out. And they can't like just show up as one or the other on command. And they're really displaying all these aspects at the same time. So one thing we want to just point out here before we move on is that it's really established that kids with the complex challenges have the right to services through the Individuals with Disability Education Act, and thus through our special education system. But in some communities, there are also discrete services to really address the needs of kids who have these distinguishing strengths to help them nurture and grow their abilities, although this is not really widespread in our Silicon Valley community. And so as a result, many parents in our community don't really understand, and many educators don't understand, that children can fit into both of these categories at the same time. And that once they do, something entirely different than just being yellow or just being blue emerges and really requires these really unique blend of services. And a lot of the reasons people don't realize this is because frequently the strength is masking the child's struggle, or the struggle is masking the child's strength. So a lot of times we're not really recognizing the whole child in terms of the services we're offering and that entire learning profile. But estimates vary. There's a varying range of estimates about the percentage of twice exceptional kids in the population. We've used some of the most conservative estimates to come up with a number of about 9,000 2E learners in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties alone. And sometimes we get asked, like, why do we use the term 2E? Where did twice exceptionality come from as a term? Because it's sometimes a new term to people. In 1922, the Council for Exceptional Children was established. This is the Association of Special Educators for the United States. So if you're a special educator and you want to go to annual training and access online resources about supporting children with learning differences, you would join the Council for Exceptional Children. It's a very robust and lively organization. And then in about the 1970s, this concept of children who have characteristics both of a high strength and a learning difference really starts to emerge. And it has lots of different names, but that's when the concept is starting to be discussed more, primarily in light of the passage of both disability legislation and other kinds of education legislation that made us really think about, what do individual kids need? Then by the 1990s, you really start to see this 2E and twice exceptional language in use, building on that Council of for Exceptional Children language and starting to look at children who have these multi-exceptionalities. In 2014, almost 10 years ago, a national working group got together to create an operational definition of this term so that it could be better researched, so that we could understand these kids better and the strategies that really help them. And then today, it's really commonly used in schools across the country. It's been adopted by many states to describe this learning profile. It's also used in leading universities around the country, like Johns Hopkins University, University of Iowa. It's widespread in peer-reviewed journals, and it's used by the Department of Education, both in grant-making programs and for the IDEA grant eligibility. I have lots more information on this if anyone is curious, but that is why we use this term. So what we want to do next is really hop into these complexities around twice exceptionality. And I do just want to mention again, as we're going through, if you have questions or ideas or thoughts, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. And we have a couple people from our team who are here who may be able to start answering questions for you. So please don't hesitate to engage with us that way. So there are really very compelling reasons to focus on the 2E learner profile. And I'm going to go through a few research facts that really show that what these children face are largely unknown risks. So the first one is in studies that look at students who receive special education services and screen them for academically advanced potential. Only 11% of those kinds of children are actually receiving the appropriate services that address both their strengths and their struggles. So we can see that our special education students are really underserved in terms of that ability to find that greatness within them. And some people might think that a distinguishing strength would offer and offset the implications of ADHD, but this is not so. According to recent research, the child who has a learner profile of being 2E with ADHD could rate up to 60% lower than their academically advanced peers in their ability to modulate their motor activity. They may even have slightly more challenge with modulating their motor activity and their verbal activity than a child that just has ADHD alone. So we'll see later as we go through some profiles of learners that blurting out answers in class can be a sign of that 2E ADHD learner profile, just that excitement to share and that inability to modulate that excitement. Then we also see that dyslexic students are not only impacted in their reading performance by their dyslexia. There's research that indicates that students who have a 2E dyslexic profile, who are also identified as having high potential in math, really have a 30% lower chance of actually reaching math proficiency. Not even advanced in math, just proficiency, because math has become such a linguistically heavy subject. And that can sometimes stand in the way of these children being able to explore that strength area in math because they're being held back by the challenges they have with reading. And lastly, I've actually been in conversations with educators who have asked me why we should invest resources in students that have strengths if they have an autistic 2E learner profile, because if they have a strength, won't they be fine? And the research says that's not the case. There's just research that came out this year suggesting that the rate of suicidal ideation among students with a 2E autistic profile is 5 times higher than their academically advanced peers. In other words, their strengths are not a protective factor in their mental wellness, but actually a risk factor for their mental wellness. And we can see this in other research and looking at the implications across a variety of research studies that 2E children's mental health is at great risk as their lived experiences are often imbued with frustration, rejection, loneliness, anxiety, and depression. And this then increases their risk for chronic absenteeism or school avoidance or low self-concept or poor educational outcomes. Even if they could go to college and are interested in it, a lot of times they may not make it there because of these experiences they've had. And that can lead to a lot of employment challenges long-term. And we know this is something that our Silicon Valley families of learners with the 2E profile really are experiencing. In a recent survey of our membership, we found that only 2 of 5 families reported their child is thriving in their current school environment. That means at least 60% are not. So this situation is completely compounded if the child comes from a culturally, linguistically, or economically diverse background, as studies show time and again that educators are more likely to focus on these children's deficits rather than their strengths. So it's even harder for those children because people aren't looking for their greatness like they could be. So before we get too far, and to better highlight what it's like to be 2E, we'd love to share this video that some high school interns made for us last summer about one 2E young woman's experience, as well as the perspective of her middle school principal. So fingers crossed, I'm going to push the play button and we're going to hope it works.
I was the assistant principal at Miller Middle School, which is where I'm at. She was really bright. She got excellent grades, if my memory serves me correctly, but she was atypical in a way. And I know that her teachers often were perplexed by her.
Hi, my name is Serena. I am a sophomore at Columbia University. I actually wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until my junior year in high school. But it's been something that's been impacting me my entire life, obviously.
Because I didn't make an assumption of, ADHD or maybe some other type of learning disability or learning difference or whatever. I didn't assume that. Then what I did assume is it must be her fault. It must be her intentionally acting out.
most of the time I didn't even know I was acting out because I just thought it was completely normal. I didn't know that you can like just like get up randomly and like run around in class, for example. So that was those were some things that happened to me in middle school. I found myself in the office a lot. My parents got emails home a lot. I think it's both not knowing I had ADHD and also because of the ADHD, because obviously like ADHD makes me more impulsive. And then it's something that can be, well, assuaged with the knowledge that you have ADHD.
There's something about kids that are quite bright that they get a little bit dismissed in the classroom.
In high school, I reached out to my counselor because I was like, okay, this kind of isn't adding up. I shouldn't really be spending like 8 hours studying for something that I would end up getting a C at. He basically was like, your grades are too high. There's no way that you have a learning disability or ADHD or anything like that. I started to think maybe I don't, as readily recognize signs of ADHD in girls. When you think ADHD, I think most people still think of the white boy stereotype. I don't think that exactly popped into their head when they were dealing with me and when they were trying to find out what was up with me. I was finally diagnosed and then had accommodations. But there was also this thing there were like Asian stigma around the subject of learning disabilities and neurodiversity. No one really wants to think that your child is like weaker or like your child is different. So there's a lot of pressure on not placing a label on yourself. What I do find myself doing is advocating for students who are getting under their teachers' skins and helping the teacher understand that there may be things at play here, that it's not that the kid is doing this intentionally, but there are things that are not completely in the child's control or level of awareness as well. And it's really up to us as the adults to help them, to help bring that to their awareness. A huge change from just being like demonized as a child to being like, oh, there is something. I am not like the terrible person that I was made to be or I thought I was. In order to support TUI learners, teachers need to have a really good understanding of what it is. And also they need to not be afraid of mentioning that possibility to a parent. Like you can be high achieving, you can still struggle. It's not something that is dependent on IQ. It's not something that's dependent on capability. And if anything, it's something that only increases your capability once you have the diagnosis, once you have the supportive measures to work around what you couldn't previously. That's what really helps me navigate my TUI journey. I was the assistant principal at.
All right. Let's all take a breath. If you have any questions, I know some people have just joined us. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm not able to check those out while I'm talking, but I will be done talking here in a minute and I will look at those. And Abby is here to answer questions, as is our other Yael partner, our other real partner, Yael. So please feel free to go ahead and put any questions or reactions into the chat. We welcome those. So we're going to shift gears a little bit now and really walk through some profiles of learners. And I want to just note that as we walk through the profiles, they're just representative, and some of the factors that we have on our slides, they're just representative of different things that we might observe or not be able to see. And there are a lot of other factors we could include. So basically, we want to start by talking about typical development. Like, what is the expected profile in a classroom? So our systems are structured in such a way that assumes there is an expected profile, or what some would call the typically developing learner. And these expectations give rise to this age-based academic standards that are set by each state and guided by national organizations, and then they get slotted in by grade level. And children are assumed to be ready to learn and capable of learning those skills and standards when they come to school at that age level based on their age. And then there are also social, emotional, self-regulatory, and executive function skills that have age-based expectations. And this diagram shows how those expectations may translate visually. So we can see that the expected profile of a student falls generally around that line of age-based expectations. And everyone's profile will be a little different, and hardly anyone ever meets the age-based expectations exactly as we think they will, but most kids are generally around that line. And that's who we're planning most of our instruction for. So now we'd like to talk about some stories of actual twice exceptional learners. These are not made up profiles. These are actual experiences that 2E learners from here in Silicon Valley have had. And just keep in mind that each 2E learner has their own unique profile, and we're providing these examples to help illustrate that variety of experiences. But there are as many profiles as there are learners, for sure. Something teachers know because they live it every day in their classroom. So in this case, this student was identified as being twice exceptional and being autistic before starting school, and then also having ADHD soon thereafter. And you see in this example that the child has very high verbal and math reasoning skills, and he absorbs info like a sponge in his interest area, including planes or train schedules or maps, or in 4th grade when they did the mission projects, he knew everything. He was like the go-to source in the class on mission projects. So, and he really loves to read, and he loves to talk about big, complex math ideas. However, we can see that despite that strong math reasoning, his math scores are showing up just around average. And he's actually having, what we're observing in the class is he's having a lot of trouble completing basic assignments. And there's a lot of anxiety coming up during math. And that is sometimes leading to classroom disruptions and struggles with homework at home. And it's extremely frustrating for him and for his parents and educator. And no one knows really why this is happening. And what's going on and isn't as easily observed is that this student actually has a slower than expected processing speed. And it's actually quite a discrepancy between his ability to reason about math. And this is a very frustrating situation. He also is not on grade level with writing. And so those things are actually contributing to those frustrations. So even those scores that are meeting grade level feel like a major deficit because his intellectual reasoning on these concepts is really high. So in this case, the disability is masking the high math ability, and his areas of strength are sometimes masking the depth of the impact of the disability. And this makes him look like he's just average in math. And that feels confusing for everybody. Because of that discrepancy, math can be both too easy and too hard for him at the same time. Because that math reasoning comes really easily, he really wants to be able to tackle more advanced concepts, and he's pretty unmotivated by math worksheets. But he can't really process the information quickly enough or write a lot of answers. So those math worksheets just look very daunting to him, and then he just feels like a failure. We can also notice where his social development and emotional regulation fall. This is another sign of that jagged 2E learner profile that we'll see over and over again, where these kids they're not right at that age-based expectation level. They're really higher than it in so many ways and lower than it in other ways. And because of those emotional regulation and social development skills, he's having a harder time regulating all of that frustration that he feels. So the bottom line here is this child has a highly asynchronous profile, and that makes it more complex to get at the heart of what he needs to really thrive in the classroom. And when we go through the vignette, we can talk about ways that we can support a child like this through their strengths, using their strengths, really leveraging what they're good at to really help them, and looking at accommodations that might help them get to those higher level skills, and really focusing on developing that greatness. Now, the next one is a profile of a first grader. And this first grader hasn't been identified with any learning differences. In fact, this child comes to school very talkative and outgoing and creative. He's very energetic and he just loves to read. And he and his friends are very imaginative in their play. They have so many fun games and stories they're making up. His vocabulary, reading, and math reasoning just seem way beyond what you'd expect from a 6-year-old. He's just lots of fun to chat with. But at the same time, he's having some unexpected challenges in the classroom. First of all, he's blurting out during circle time. He just cannot regulate his energy and enthusiasm. And second, writing workshop is just a nightmare for him and his teacher. He can't get anything on paper. And he's tried to explain to his teacher that writing actually hurts his hand, but she's just not sure what he means by that. And she's so confused because he's so creative and highly verbal. She can't understand what's holding him back. And because she's only human, sometimes she gets frustrated because she so wants him to be able to write all that great information that's in his head. And she tries to encourage him just by saying, could you please try harder? Please try harder. By third grade, this child just feels like he's really dumb. He doesn't know why he can't do the written work or control his desire to share what he knows during group time, that blurting that's happening. So after a comprehensive evaluation, he's actually identified as having ADHD and dysgraphia. And when he said it hurt to write as a first grader, like he meant it literally, like it hurt to write. And so once he was given the accommodation to type and to use keyboarding, you know, it was great. And most of the adults in his life thought that would be the solution to really helping him. But organizing his thoughts continued to be a struggle because of that ADHD and the executive function challenges. And also dysgraphia isn't always just a disability of physical writing. It can be a challenge just in terms of organizing your thoughts. So this child got a lot of what he needed once he was truly understood. And now that he's older, he really realizes that he has such a complex profile and he really has to advocate for what he needs because it's challenging for people to understand. So the next jagged profile also came into school without any diagnoses. This young lady's academic and intellectual abilities persistently were above age-based grade expectations. So everything looks great. She's going to do really well. School's going to be awesome. But some things start to crop up. First of all, in her writing, if she can't write about something that interests her, she appears to lack motivation completely or really have a hard time initiating the work. She's meeting these age-based expectations for math right now. Like if we look at who she is when she starts school, she's kind of right on target with her age-based expectations. But she really, really hates doing the math worksheets. They really take a lot longer just to argue about them than it would take to get them done, but she just really can't stand doing them. But then she gets a set of murderous maths books and they have all this interesting and narrative concept around math, and her brain is just totally turned on about math. And all of a sudden, she's interested in advanced math concepts like patterns and algebraic concepts and number theory and tricks that you can do with math. And she really has an ability to perform well in math when she's given more challenge. But at the same time, her teachers notice she's just not making any friends, and she doesn't want to go to school. Other students hum and whistle, and she becomes emotionally dysregulated when that happens. She sometimes even tries to leave the classroom, and that worries her teacher a lot. Her teacher's very worried about her safety. The group work makes her really nervous, and she's picking at her skin to the point that she has dozens of scabs all over her body. And although her teacher and parents can see this, they just aren't really sure what's going on. So finally, just before 7th grade, a comprehensive evaluation identifies her as autistic and with a general anxiety disorder. This is when she's 12 and a half. These have impacted her social and executive function skills. So even though she has strong baseline processing speed and working memory, that anxiety is really challenging her from an executive function perspective. So by the time these challenges are really understood more fully, she's just been through a lot, and there's a lot of damage that's been done. Her self-esteem was at an all-time low, and she completely lost her verve for learning, despite all these ways that she is a really strong student. But once she could really learn about her own sensory experience and how to really work with that to do better emotional regulation strategies, she really turned a corner. And she developed a strong drive for independence and a self-understanding that's helping her show up closer to her best self in her high school experience. And then our last profile is of a child who is dyslexic, who we knew really early on was dyslexic and ADHD twice exceptional. And you'll see that his journey was quite different from some of the others. So from a young age, this child was called a little lawyer. He was a quick talker. He was full of ideas, but he would not write them down. He was a very verbose child who couldn't, despite intensive support, learn to read. He was very animated in class, but he struggled to sit still and produce work. And he also struggled with math homework because he couldn't read the word problems. His parents and teachers noted all of these differences really early on, and they were really determined to understand his specific learning profile. And you can see his profile is all over the place. So starting in second grade, he received dyslexia interventions and tutoring that were very effective due to his early identification. And meanwhile, teachers provided a lot of accommodations that allowed him to shine in his areas of strength. He also began medication for his ADHD, and that helped him focus and stay on task in class. So his confidence and success grew with all of these different support strategies. And he was really able to harness his creativity, his energy, and his enthusiasm and apply it to all the things he enjoys, such as starting his own business, working on game design, doing debate. And this is a story of what's possible when these children are identified and supported. They're really able to show up better for themselves and everyone else. So before we move on into the rest of the presentation, we just wanted to say, of course, there are factors that can make it a challenge to see a learner's true profile. And we just want to make sure to cover these so that we acknowledge that these are complex situations. So for example, if a child isn't meeting those age-based expectations for English language proficiency, maybe because they're an English language learner, or they're non-speaking and they haven't yet been introduced to alternative communication devices or taught to use sign language, these are all things that are going to make it really hard to understand a child's full strengths and a child's full needs. But these kids, may have this 2E learner profile. And so we need to just make sure we're being on the lookout for it. We already talked a little bit about gender and the 2E child who is autistic and female. The story we talked about isn't uncommon. Research actually indicates that girls who don't have a co-occurring intellectual disability are diagnosed on average 3 years later than their male counterparts. And that is a long time to go without understanding who you truly are as a learner and as a person. And this is really similar with ADHD. We saw this in the video with Serena and Adrian. And these girls then can be very confusing to their educators' parents, and most importantly to themselves. And they really develop a narrative around being broken that is not accurate about who they are. And of course, we've mentioned this before, the culturally and economic disadvantaged students. They're subject to a wide variety of biases that complicate the ability to understand the true nature of their strengths and challenges. And we see scholars such as Dr. Joy Lawson Davis and Dr. Donna Ford, who have coined the term 3E to talk about students that have these intersecting identities. And this can also impact children who are economically disadvantaged. So now I am going to hand it over to Abby, who's going to continue on with our presentation.
Okay, thanks, guys. And Callie, I'm probably going to have to skip a few slides, so I'll just let you know when we do that. So let me, we've talked about now several different profiles of twice exceptional students who have all had different learning differences, different challenges, different strengths. Well, what are some commonalities between the twice exceptional students? Twice exceptional students generally have distinguishing strengths, which include those passionate interests, a sense of justice and fairness, quite common with your twice exceptional learner, and a real drive to learn. And then at the same time, they've also got some complex challenges, including anxiety, written production struggles, social communications challenges, working with other people, communicating what they're feeling and what they need, and executive function challenges. And then I think I won't spend a lot of time here, but it's important to remember that despite all of the challenges that these students have, and we always focus a lot on all of the accommodations and the interventions that we need to provide, we want to think about all of the strengths that some of these differences can provide these students as well. And again, as Sharmilla mentioned, we're not trying to say that all 2E students need to become world-changing luminaries in their fields, but simply to recognize that there are students who do have these sorts of differences, who also have the potential inside them to achieve whatever is their own personal greatness. So things for dyslexics that are common strengths are making connections across disciplines, abilities, uncanny abilities of 3D spatial perspectives and thinking, narrative reasoning expertise, and again, those are dyslexia strengths. Common strengths of individuals with ADHD are very creative, out-of-the-box thinkers, enthusiastic, often risk takers, adventurous, often the entrepreneurs are ADHD. And then individuals with autism often really shock us or impress us with their knowledge, their skill, their passion and motivation in those interest areas. They're intently focused on details. They often are very logical, very, very honest. And again, those are some strengths that we see of the ASD profile. So now let's jump into our middle school vignette, Andy, on the next slide there. And so let me read you a quick summary of who Andy is. Andy, again, this is another based on a real student that we know in our community. Andy is a 6th grader who has ADHD and dyslexia. His IEP testing showed him with very superior cognitive abilities and academic achievement ratings from 2 years behind to 5 years ahead of grade level, including both in math and verbal reasoning. Yet Andy is chronically late to classes. So since his middle school counts tardies per class rather than per day, he's quickly racking up tardies, being sent to detention after each set of 10 and sent to Saturday school each time he racks up 30. So when teachers ask him why he's late, there's a wide variety of reasons. He needs to find something in his locker. There wasn't enough time between classes. The locker area was crowded, so he was waiting. He had to go get something because he brought the wrong materials or he forgot something. He left the last class late because he stayed after to talk to the teacher. It took him a long time to get back from one particular area of the campus because it's far, or he ran into friends and got distracted. There's all sorts of reasons, and the list goes on and on. He's really eager to please, and he really wants to get to class on time, remember what to bring, and get his homework done and turned in. He just doesn't know how. So I'm gonna have Callie quickly read what's the teacher thinking in this moment.
Yes, so in this scenario, the teacher is thinking, well, it's a teaching team because he's in middle school. So the different teachers are thinking these things. I know he's got ADHD. I read it in his IEP, but middle school is when kids need to grow up and learn responsibility, independence, and self-management. Or, I don't understand why Andy struggles so much with the simple stuff. He's so bright. Why can't he get to class and turn his homework in? Or, it seems to me that Andy doesn't really care whether he's on time to my class. I think he's intentionally defiant about the rules in our school. Or, Andy is always late and doesn't turn his work in on time. I need to correct that behavior before he goes to high school. I'm just going to let his different teacher says, I'm just going to let this behavior slide. He knows the material, even if his grades don't really reflect his knowledge. It's just middle school, so grades don't matter that much. And then the last teacher says, I really want to help Andy, but I don't know how. I just don't have time to experiment with different approaches. Things are really busy right now. So with all of these thoughts, the teaching team has a collective frustration level of about a 7. And they might keep giving Andy tardies and detentions or zeros on the assignments, or maybe direct him harshly in front of his peers. And so without that support to learn and practice those underdeveloped executive function skills, his strengths just really aren't going to be acknowledged at all. And the measures taken by his teaching team, while coming from a place of really caring and wanting Andy to be prepared for high school, are likely to erode his self-confidence and ability to understand the best ways he needs to advocate for his needs and his growth.
So let's just take a quick moment and imagine what his visualized profile might look like. Now you see that his academic skills are all overall pretty high, like we discussed. His executive function and his social emotional skills are a bit lower. Now this is a great visualization. Not all teachers have access to this information. We don't know whether he has an IEP. Not all TUI students do, and even if they do, they may not cover all these elements. But just to give you a sense, if you were to visualize, what we know about Andy thus far, this is where he might be, and you start to see that real jagged shape of the profile. So now let's step back a minute and look at what Real recommends, what advice that we'd like to give to teachers to help support them in this situation. So we're in the process of developing this educator framework that will help teachers, providing them with strategies and support for these twice exceptional students. So one of the first things that we like to talk about is always connect and be curious. And so before we can talk about how we want to rethink this child's situation, we want to think about reframing our own thinking. And so we base this work in the work of Dr. Ross Green, who suggests that kids do well if they can. And so with a child, if they're not doing something or they're acting out in a certain way, it's not because they won't do something, but that they can't do it yet. And so the goal is for us as the adults in their lives to change our mindset and become curious what's going on inside the child's mind. So we can have them shift from won't to can't yet. And we start to shift from being more judgmental to being more curious. This really helps us shift our view from the child who's being willful and defiant to really considering what the outside stressors are, what the skills deficits might be, the sensory challenges, or other issues which are making things difficult for that child. And we begin to change our thoughts from they just want attention, or they're lazy, or they're obstinate, to, you know, what is getting in their way and how can we work together to remove those obstacles? And that helps us have a different response to the child. So instead of coming up with rewards and punishments, or, you know, publicly shaming them in front of the class, in other ways we're trying to think of ways to help them cooperate. We start to focus on uncovering what those barriers are and removing those barriers, again, in partnership with the child. And it really changes the child's experience completely. They move from frustration, guilt, being ashamed and embarrassed, to feeling like they're in a supportive relationship and that this is an adult, that you are an adult that they can trust. So of course, this all looks really pretty in this beautiful graphic. It looks really easy on paper. We know that it's quite hard to do. We know from our own personal experiences with our own children, it's quite hard to do. And we always have to remember to care for ourselves, and that we need to try to have our own emotional regulation as much as we help, under control for ourselves, sort of like putting on your own oxygen mask first. And of course, you'll do better or worse on some days. You'll make mistakes, that's human, but it's always helpful to keep that in mind. If you take time to regulate your own emotions, you'll be better equipped to help others. And I think this all builds to one of the most important suggestions that we provide, which is always build that trust. So the 2E kids rely on that trusted bond with their educators for motivation, and especially in their challenge areas. And ways to build trust are one-on-one sessions where the educator gets to know the student's strengths, find out what their interests are, and really use those in future interactions, both during class, in class content, but also just in general casual conversation and connection with that student. You can find common interests, share personal stories, and the educator then is modeling and showing that she will listen when the student is self-advocating and will really work to try to help make them successful. Another element of the picture is to take time to listen to parents, to understand what they're seeing at home and what ideas that they might have about what's worked for them at home and what might work in the classroom. And once this trust is built, educators will be able to slowly ramp up work in a lot of those more challenging areas. And when students and parents know that you'll listen when they have an issue and make a change on their behalf, they're more likely to come to you and help work through challenges as a team, and everyone will experience less anxiety. And I think that's really the critical piece. Remember, you're not doing this alone. There's an entire support team, both at your school, around the parent, the parent, what other outside services this child might be getting. There's a whole team there that are there to support and give advice. And so if you're seeing something confusing and you want to reframe, but you aren't sure where to start, there's all these people that you can work out to. And if we all remember that we're looking towards that common goal of success for the child, we're not at odds, but we're working together. That's a really important thing to remember. So returning to Andy, let's take a moment and try to reframe with this new perspective and see what Andy might be thinking internally. So I'm going to have Callie read Andy's internal thoughts.
All right. Oh, I'm such a failure. I just can't get things right. I was so excited to go to middle school, and I looked forward to learning new things and being more challenged, but I just cannot meet the teacher's expectations for staying organized. It's hard for me to keep track of all the classes, and when homework is due for what subject, I can't believe I'm getting such bad grades. I understand the topics, but I just can't get the homework in on time. I am so embarrassed. My teachers keep reprimanding me in front of my classmates. This school is so big and everything is a distraction. I'm completely overwhelmed getting from one end of the school to the other in such a short period of time. There are just so many things to look at and see. I can't seem to stay focused.
And so now the teacher may have a different perspective now that they've started to think about what these thoughts are and maybe spoken with the student and maybe with their team. And so maybe instead some of the teachers in Andy's life can start to have these new thoughts, like my usual approach of using pep talks and allocating consequences like grades and tardies to motivate good behavior just doesn't really seem to be working for Andy. I appreciate that he's motivated, and so perhaps it's just that he lacks some skills. So I wonder how I can help him and support him in getting those. He's really pushing back on this particular task. You know, something about this task must be really difficult for him, and he's having a hard time expressing that. I wonder if we can help break it down into mini steps to pinpoint the exact difficulties, and then we can build scaffolds together to help strengthen those needed skills. Or, that big reaction that Andy has kind of seemed out of character. I wonder if something is bothering him, and I can reach out to his parents and send them an email to see if anything is going on in other parts of his life. I know Andy's friends think he's smart, so he may just be embarrassed that he can't do this task that others are completing with ease. So maybe that's why he's acting like he doesn't care about the results. So I think I can work with him privately to get over this hump. And so that when I'm able to do that and start to do those reframing, the collective stress level around Andy from the teacher's perspective can go down to a 3. So what are the other tips that we recommend? Well, the other thing that we like to talk about at REAL is to make sure to take time to identify and integrate strengths and interests. So what you're seeing on the slide is the way I like to think of it. When you first get a diagnosis, you think about these 3 things. And pretty commonly, people think about what are the interventions. So what are the targeted services this child needs or my child needs? Like what tutoring or what medication or what therapy or what outside support can I get to help them? And they also think often about the accommodations, with sort of kind of those small modifications that make differences that can be huge. Like, can I offer audiobooks or dictation tools or text-to-speech tools? Can I provide them fidgets or alternatives for seating or lighting? And both of those things are critical, and I think it's wonderful that we think about both of those. But at REAL, we also want to advocate heavily for strength. And this is the piece that's most often forgotten and is really the most critical element of the 3 that really, the other 2 will not have the success that you're hoping for unless the strengths are considered and integrated. So these are the things that interest them, that they're passionate about, the things that light them up, that bring them the motivation, that really instill the confidence, that fill their bucket so that they can tackle those more challenging elements. And it's just critically important that we acknowledge those strengths that each child has and figure out how to integrate them into the classroom. And part of that is also going to mean embracing flexibility. So again, this might mean having flexible physical environment changes in your room, like considering lighting, having a quiet space or sound options like headphones, different spaces for movement, calm spaces, exercise breaks, etc. But it also means just taking the idea of flexibility to heart and thinking about in your classroom, always practicing universal design for learning and differentiation and supporting executive functioning differences and asynchrony. So I think it's really important to always keep in mind, and on the previous slide, there's some really great suggestions for different ways to work and differentiate with these kids. Content understanding is mandatory, but workload is not. And this is really a big mind shift. So you want to focus on teaching and learning skills and content, but not necessarily that they need to be able to handle a huge workload. Being more rigorous does not necessarily mean having more work, just tons of work. So we think about building skills on these slides and working with students throughout middle school, especially, to work on these things and helping them learn content faster and deeper, but not exclusively just more workload and that kind of thing. And so when you're working with students on the next slide, remember always that you can differentiate on content, process, and product, and you can do that according to your students' readiness and their learning profile, and also critically on their interest level and their strength areas. So now we'll kind of go back to our wrapping up our vignette with Andy and thinking about, and I would love it if you guys have any ideas for Andy that you can put these things in the chat. but thinking about everything that we've just covered, what are some ideas we can try with Andy? So now that we've understand what's going on with him more internally, and we've started to reframe our mindset, how can we be flexible, build trust, incorporate and build on his strengths? So throw in any ideas that you've got in the chat, and we'll just do that for a minute. What were some things that you might do differently in the classroom to support him? Here's some examples. We can have Andy join the math competition team. We know there's one out there, and we know he's great at math, and this will be a thing that he may be really interested and excited to do, and will help build his confidence and help him really feel good about himself.
We have one from Audrey who said to give a survey to students about their strengths and interests. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. I also like that what you're saying there is involve all of the students in the classroom. I think all of these strategies that we talk about for twice exceptional students can and should be really used on all of the students in the classroom, not only because there's no reason to single any student out and they don't want to feel that way, but also because integrating strengths of any student will be a wonderful way for them to be engaged in the classroom. Being flexible and providing options for students, scaffolding executive function support. These are all things that all students could benefit from.
The idea of giving the survey to students about their strengths and interests, one of the things we talk about that some too is coming back to those surveys periodically throughout the year, because it's really easy to get very busy and not be thinking about how to be integrating that throughout the year. And so it's just something like some teachers we know will just put it on their calendar, like every month on, Monday at 4, they're going to check that again and make sure they're integrating that information in.
So some other things Andy can do, maybe he can tutor students in math. Maybe he can start a math enrichment interest club in a particular area that interests him. Some other ideas we've got are let him bring a backpack to class so he doesn't have to go back and forth to his locker quite as often. Let him leave classroom materials in the classroom so he doesn't always have to bring them, back and forth with him all of the time. Sometimes you might let him dismiss him a minute or two early if he needs extra time to get through to his locker to get something or move to the next class. I think we talked about this, but break larger assignments into smaller pieces, help him scaffold some of those smaller elements and support his executive function challenges, and work together with the whole team. So speak with his case manager, his grade level counselor. All of the teachers can work together, and so make sure that they're all on the same page with their approach and their strategies. And make sure to involve Andy. I think we've talked about that a lot, but especially by middle school and high school, you can talk with these students about what's going wrong. You can ask them what are some ideas they have that might help them work better, or get them excited, or what do they want to spend some time focusing on. Really involve them in the problem solving. So I just want to mention that we've also provided, we've got a large number of these vignettes that we work through with different communities. We have elementary, middle school, high school, all sorts of differences. We've pulled together 3 for you, and I'll put the link in the chat there. If you're interested, you can work through another one called Ben, who's 5th grader. Andy is this one, and then we have one Nikki in 9th grade. So I see there's a question, and so I'm gonna let one of my colleagues look over that and see if they want to address in the chat, or maybe read it out loud. But also anyone else wants to add to the chat anything that they learned that surprised them, something that they weren't expecting to hear today, or something that they wonder, some next steps they'd like to learn more about. If there are any questions we can answer. And then also we would just love it if everyone takes a minute and think about an action step that they can take in their own life with their own twice exceptional individuals in their life, professionally or personally, to take next. All right, so let's see what questions. So yes, we would love your feedback. I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. Okay, so let's see some of the questions we have here. What would you advise to parents if their child's private high school does not offer accommodations or changes? School policy is no change in work expectations or curriculum. High school child was diagnosed recently. So it makes me wonder if it's a private. I was just going to say, is it public or private? So the first question would be, right, a public is going to have some certain requirements. I think that in a private school setting, I mean, that's a challenging question. I think that you want to partner with them. You want to work with the team. And I think make them, or in the attempt to get them to understand that these are not deficiencies, but differences, and that supporting the child to help them learn the best and that they possibly can, and in the way that works most successfully for them, is going to be aligned with their mission of making successful education for their student community. I don't know if Callie, you have another answer to that. I think it's a challenging one. And I think sometimes you find, I was actually just talking to a family of a student at a private school. There's a worry about revealing diagnoses to a school because maybe the school will say, well, this is not the place for you. And that is an awful experience to have. And yet at the same time, wouldn't it be better to know that up front rather than struggling through something that is not going to work, that is going to make everybody miserable? And the sooner you know, the sooner you can find the right place where they are able to support those differences. They are able to provide the student with these different strengths-based supports, the flexibility, the accommodations, and the interventions, rather than suffering through that. It's a painful thing for any family to go through, but I think that making sure everyone's on the same page is the right thing to do. Is a 2E diagnosis more common among older students, middle school and up? That's another great question. I think that we often find for a 2E student that they can often fly under the radar. Typically it's around 4th grade that we'll start to see the students become more challenged, having more challenges in school. And this is when they often get diagnosed, but it's absolutely not, not always that way. In fact, in our support groups, we have many kids who are being diagnosed in preschool, in kindergarten. My own son was diagnosed in 1st grade. And so it can be at any age, but yes, it's typically as the workload gets more challenging, right? And the expectations are higher, that we start to see some of the things that they were able to mask, they no longer can mask. What would be the best starting point if I suspect that my son is
I think we
2E?
addressed that in our comments. I think this last question here is probably one we could address. You can address here, and then maybe it should be our last question so we can.
Okay. Why don't you read that one out?
Yeah, both my husband and I are 2Es, and I said thank you, Helen, for sharing that with us. Would our child be best served in public rather than private school for potential diagnosis later on?
There is no easy answer to that question. Every child is different, and every 2E profile is different. And I think that there's no one best school and there's no one best solution. So for any child at any point, you're just trying to optimize for what's best for your family, your situation at that moment. So for some 2E families, it's absolutely public school. They, public schools are dedicated to serving all learners. So if you're there, you can work with them, you can get an IEP, you can get services and support. They can't kick you out. You're there, you can work with that team. And many 2E families have had a lot of success going that route. Others have decided to go to private schools. There is a number of private schools focused on all sorts of things, on supporting kids with, advanced academic abilities, gifted students. There are private schools, more focused on, they use a lot of technology in their programs, or there's other programs that, are really, they have a lot of project-based learning, a lot of moving around. There are schools that are focused on learning differences. And for each child at a different stage in their life, one of those programs might be right for them, and it might only be right for a certain amount of time before it's no longer right. Again, the challenges with private schools are they don't have to accept everyone. So you're looking for a school that is going to be the right fit for who your child is and what they need, and that the school can support them.
Before we go, we just want to remind everyone that you can be in touch with us in any number of ways. You can email us at hello@real2e.org. Check out our website. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and all of our recordings are on YouTube. We do have a private Google group for parents so that they can ask questions just like have been posed here in this forum tonight. And you can sign up for that on our website. And then we do have a list of the resources we used and all of the references from our presentation. Harry, I also put in the chat, we'd love to know what role people play, if they're a parent, an educator, a student, an EdTherapist.
Yeah.
and what
Absolutely.
motivated people to come today. Thanks everyone for your active engagement and for sticking with us longer than expected. I said to some people in the chat when we practiced this on our own, I think we went through it faster. And then once we started doing it, we wanted to be slower and more deliberate to make sure what we were saying was useful. So apologies for running over a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here. I know we went a little over, but I think we had a lot of great information to share. So we appreciate you sticking around for us. Of course, huge thanks to Callie, Abby, and Sharmilla for these important insights. We wanted to share just a few courses we have coming up this fall, which we think might be a nice complement to tonight's conversation and build things out a bit more. As I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up message in the coming days with a more polished version of tonight's recording. And we'll also include quick links to these courses. If you have any questions or if you think of anything later, you can always email us at extension@ucsc.edu. You can see that there at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we know summer is busy and it's hot out there, so we appreciate taking the time to be with us tonight. We hope to see you around campus again soon. So take care, everyone. Thank you.